Hello and welcome to the 27th Annual Get Lit Festival. I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit organization housed within Eastern Washington University. Our program is responsible for Get Lit, Washington State's longest-running annual literary festival, which hosts dozens of free and low-cost readings, craft classes, panel discussions, and many more exciting literary events. This year's headlining authors are Maggie Smith, Lee Young Lee, and Dinez Smith. We're thrilled to be hosting in-person events featuring those headliners alongside over 60 talented writers from our region and beyond. The festival takes place this Thursday through Sunday, April 10th through the 13th in many venues across downtown Spokane, Cheney, and even Coeur d'Alene. And we're excited to be presenting 8 virtual events here on YouTube this year. You can find our full schedule along with information about all of our festival authors by visiting our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to welcome Mackenzie Draper, Get Lit's Assistant Coordinator, who will introduce today's event.
Welcome, everyone. We're excited to present poets Nadia Alexis, Jessica Gigot, Dorcia Smith-Silva, and Dorinda Wegner in this event, Women Eco-Poets as Conduits of Social Change and Empowerment. From Hurricane Maria's impact in Puerto Rico to the resilience of Pacific Northwest farming communities, from the trauma of displacement and marginalization by urban sprawl to spiritual reconnection as a Black woman survivor of gender violence, social upheaval and climate change affect us all. These 4 poets will read their work and engage in a conversation that explores their relationships with earth, plants, and animals. They will share how their work intersects with climate change, ecosystem degradation, and population vulnerabilities, and focus on intersectionality with social transformation, pushing writers to see their writing goals as a response to activism and the environment. Our first reader is Jessica Gigot. Jessica is a poet, farmer, and coach. She lives on a little sheep farm in the Skagit Valley. Her second book of poems, Feeding Hour, was a finalist for the 2021 Washington State Book Award. Jessica's writing and reviews appear in several publications, such as Orion, the New York Times, the Seattle Times, Ecotone, Terrain.org, and Poetry Northwest. She is currently a poetry editor for The Hopper. Her award-winning memoir, A Little Bit of Land, was published by Oregon State University Press in 2022. Please welcome Jessica.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm just really honored to be here on this panel and to be part of the virtual Get Lit event. I was there in person last year, and it's a really excellent festival. So I'm going to read a selection of poems, old and new, that speak to the theme of this panel, and I'm looking forward to our conversation afterward. The first poem is called Flood Patterns, and it's from my first book, Flood Patterns, which speaks a lot to the area where I live and work, which is a lot of what I write about. The Skagit Valley is originally Swinomish and Upper Skagit land. It's also a lot of farmland at this point, sort of the last intact area of farming along I-5 between Vancouver, BC and California. So this poem is called Flood Patterns, Skagit Delta. Nobody wants to lose land. God plays with the light until the sky becomes empty and dark. A storm trembles in the mountain, echoing thunder. This river can run high as glaciers thread down to thick streams. When the land was half marsh, the fields knew only flood. Our truths are ready to spill over the rim every time the river rises again. And I'm going to read a few poems from my second book, Feeding Hour, which part of this book is about my flock of sheep, which were my first children, and then my experience of early motherhood. And I actually learned a lot raising the sheep that helped me in mothering, and I guess I'm still a student of motherhood. This first poem is called Fleece. The sheep are shorn 2 times a year. In fall, steam rises from white, now slender bodies that huddle together bare shoulder to bare shoulder. By now, each belly is full of new life. Without a half year's worth of wool, We can measure the swell of each ewe as she matures toward motherhood. Their lanolin-soaked fleeces are clouds piled in the barn, waiting to be cleaned and carded and spun into yarn. We celebrate this wonder, fiber transformed from grass, mindful that another season has passed. I have a lot of sheep poems, but I won't read those all today. This is a poem actually about pelicans. We get a lot of migratory swans in this part of Western Washington, and now we're starting to get pelicans, which were normally found more southward. And I wrote this poem several years ago, and apparently this group of pelicans have decided they're not leaving, so they're now our permanent residents. And this is called Two Mothers Walking for Anna. We thought they were swans, far offshore in a huddle, lazy swans that chose to stay. But the long arc of orange gave them away. Stragglers, climate change refugees that in a normal year would never reach our northern cove of coastline. But what is normal anymore? We were talking about life and babies, my daughter about to walk, your daughter graduating. You want to clutch and hold her close, while mine refuses to be put down. They grow up so fast, you say. I need more time to myself, I say. Driven to near extinction by pollution, these pelicans are a miracle or an omen. We stride slowly like the unfurling tide, acknowledging these visitors and the fierce uncertainty of what may come next. And I just want to read a few new poems that are part of a new manuscript that hasn't been published yet, that continues to think about mothering and land, but also in the context of ecological grief. So this first poem is called Duplex for the Anthropocene. Roast the last tomatoes. Sugar after burn tastes sweet. Hustle to harvest all that remains of summer. Hurry. What will remain has always been up to us. Leaves red, yellow, orange show beauty in death. To die beautifully is to leave red and never yellow. Orange is extinction. A word to use sparingly, like love. Love what we can spare from extinction. Dark mornings allow for deep contemplation. Deep mourning doesn't have to be dark if you allow loss. Let the first light through the blinds. Blinded, let's not take these losses lightly. Wind blows fallen leaves over the neighbor's fence. Neighbor, don't leave while we weather these blows this fall. Roast the last tomatoes. Sugar after burn tastes sweet. And this is a poem called Amends. It is hard to hold a homegrown head of broccoli in your hand and not feel proud. Seed to start, seedling to robust stalk and floret. I cradled this broccoli like my firstborn. The infant I protected from damping off. Aphids, clubroot, and flea beetles dotting up the leaves. The green gleams and sparkles. In this 1 hour, on this one day, I make amends with the earth. Other times, I buy the shipped-in stuff, California's wellspring, touched by 1,000 hands and automated sanitation. Sweat makes this one something special. The give and take of it all, my muddied pride. And my last poem is called The Scientist, because before I started writing poems, I was a scientist, so that it's something that always sort of I don't want to say haunts me, but it's a part of I can't get away from it. And this is from a research project I did a long time ago, and there are some lines from Emily Dickinson sort of sprinkled in here. The scientist. She tells me frogs are disappearing at an alarming rate. We count the bees foraging for nectar in stands of jewelweed. Following the professor's instructions, we caught them in our nets, put them to sleep in jars on ice, and glued tiny numbers on their backs. Of clovers and of noon. She wants to be a herpetologist after graduation, to save the frogs from extinction. I am not sure what I want to be or save. Perhaps these bees or this meadow, things unaware they need saving. She collects a tiny cache of pollen from their stick legs to examine in the laboratory, scribbles in her waterproof notebook. Dotted with yarrow and bachelor buttons, goldenrod about to burst, this meadow, our study site, is all story. Nature is what we know, yet have no art to say. I contemplate the gentle quiver of Queen's Anne lace, fields of gilt. Caring, she whispers, is the hardest part. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Our second reader is Dorcia Smith Silva. The author of In Inheritance of Drowning, Dorcia is also a poetry editor of The Hopper, a professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. She has received scholarships and fellowships from Breadloaf and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing. Her poetry is forthcoming in the Ecopoetry Anthology Volume 2, the Cimarron Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, and elsewhere. She has a PhD in Caribbean literature and is a member of the Get the Word Out poetry cohort and 5/50 cohort of poets and writers. Please welcome Dorcia.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Mackenzie. And thank you so much to the wonderful Get Lit staff. We're so happy to be here, so excited. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jessica, for that lovely reading. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be reading several poems from my book. It's called In Inheritance of Drowning. And the book really centers Hurricane Maria, which was a devastating hurricane that affected much of the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico. So the first poem I'm going to read is called My Grandmother's Photo. And this poem centers the mementos that get lost when you have a hurricane, any kind of natural disaster. My grandmother's photo. She smiles in black and white, cotton pleated dress with a thick belt, showing her newlywed 25-inch waist, a size 4, long before the folds of stretched skin from 3 children. Her ebony hair hangs in shiny cascading ringlets, held by a slip of red ribbon and crystal combs. Her hand is wrapped tightly around my grandfather's. New gold branding their fingers, paid for by the weight of dirt and hot dawn mornings. With just one day, the rain washes out my grandmother's body and makes her a false whisper upon inspection. Brown dots replace her smile, and her hands are swallowed by dark spirals and bubbles. The thin edges fall into wrinkled tatters, sprinkles of paper breaking faster from sheets of water. The wind pushes her, cracked and rearranged, besides an overturned car, like a new broken flower in the grave. So the next poem I'm going to read is called The Bee. And this poem also relates to Hurricane Maria. If we think about these natural disasters, they only, when we think about them, they just don't only affect humans and animals, they also affect the entire ecosystem, including the bees. So this is a poem called The Bee. After Hurricane Maria, you spin in a daze, punch drunk from the fetid fumes of the generator, but you have made a decision to eat, live. You leap onto a tan bra that is widely flapping on the clothesline. eager to gather something sweet and bring it to the surface. And yet there is nothing there but a bare circle of cotton. You wonder how the hurricane galloped away with the flowers, triggering a vanishing act. Well, where is the magician wand to bring back the canopy of blossoms? It must be in the wind of loss, along with the why and because. There is no way to tell you about the aftermath slow cruelty. It is a tale that claws cell by cell, leaving wings to litter this earth. And the next one I'm going to read is called the Q&A section. This is for all those people that get displaced after a natural disaster. I think of all the people that had to leave Puerto Rico, not because they wanted to, but because they lost their homes, because of fear, all the wondering, when is another hurricane going to come or another natural disaster? So they decided to leave. So this poem is really about that feeling. The Q&A section. If you ask me why I left Puerto Rico, I would tell you that it wasn't because Hurricane Maria left me with a bloated album of waiting for the blackouts to skip between the trees. It wasn't because the roofs unfurled and the doors retreated to hollows somewhere in the sky. It wasn't because of the shells of water inching like new constellations across an endless night. It was the full circle of fear, the kind that stays in my mouth like neon jawbreakers, refusing to surrender, tailor-made to dislocate words that I long to speak. I dread colliding against this familiar when the memory gathers like burning hands around your throat. And my next poem is also about a hurricane. And this one is about Hurricane Maria. And in an ideal world, when we think about hurricanes, they would just be another storm system that would come and leave without causing devastation. So this poem is about that. What if we could just imagine a hurricane being just that, just another storm system appearing and then leaving, just like that. So this poem is called What the Poet is Supposed to Write About a Hurricane. What the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane should be skylights of horror, not skip rocks of beauty in walls of wind, affixed to the puzzle pieces of the vortex eye, spinning like a lost continent soul. How the lively whip should stun the mouths of gravity, hissing without hesitation, engulfing the stench of uprooted dirt and grass. The poet is supposed to decode the stanzas, shudder the name Maria into frail syllables, to wish a hurricane a fast and gritty death, not say its stubborn slow dances held intoxicating possibilities and mysteries. So the next poem I'm going to read is a new poem, and this was published in the Los Angeles Review. It's called Salvation and an Injured Bird. If we think about what's happening now with the environment, how we can help all the creatures, including the animals, including the birds, this is the salvation that we are all hoping for. Salvation and an Injured Bird. It wasn't meant to be saved among my memoir of hurricane, to beat back the armed sun. Wind is stunned that the wings aren't threadbare. Don't plunge to the street as brittle bones of loss. Call it luck that no cage can thatch feathers, no net can puncture beak. Winds flap despite the death wish season, which means memory to shudder direction and chains chime for flock to follow. It wasn't meant to be saved. When the sky loots the last bundle of bruises, swells blue, then black. And my last poem is a positive poem. It's called G is for Greenhood. When we think about the earth and its resilience, how green always fights to return, this poem is what comes to my mind always, that if we can hope for the environment, we hope for a world of green, a world where we can actually help the environment, where we are in harmony with the environment. G is for greenhood. G is for greenhood, for spring sitting on my shoulders, then fastening to eye level. Chantus gladiolus spinning, bowing in the distance. Sense of green, greening until earth gets it right. Green that I can't keep to myself. Say, green belongs within reach, like an extract of sepal outside of the flower body. You wouldn't recognize me when I cradle green, for fear of it becoming worn in many places. Even when morning lurks upside down, green, not this green, never hurts. Ask the taracos giving off green among drizzled leaves. Ask the grasshoppers that throw themselves against grass because it glistens. Ask wet green in my blood that hasn't forgotten spared green across homeland, where your green overlaps with mine. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorcia. Our next reader is Nadia Alexis. A poet, writer, and photographer, Nadia was born and raised in Harlem to Haitian immigrants. Her debut full-length collection of poetry and photography, Beyond the Watershed, was just published by Cavan Carey Press. Her writing and photography have been published and exhibited widely in the US and in Cuba. She has received several awards, including a 2024 Mississippi Star Teacher Award, and she was the 2023 Poet of the Year honoree of the Haitian Creatives Digital Awards. A fellow of the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop and the Watering Hole, she holds a PhD and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Mississippi. Please welcome Nadia.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm going to read some poems from my new collection that just came out called Beyond the Watershed, and I'm hoping that these markers that I put in here will help me to get to the poems fast. So the very first poem that I will read is Watershed. It's the title poem of the book, Watershed. I arrive at my father's feet, a dying maple tree. He covers his eyes with mud while goats feast on my fallen hair. I hear my mother call for the Lord to send just enough rain for our lungs and her carnations to see a new season. My mother says boys are best at taking. I once loved a boy who turned pomegranates in my yard into salt. In the mirror, I see a donkey's head without a home. Daisies dance atop her hair, and she teaches me how to wail for cover. My mother and I kneel on uncooked rice. Sweat of our hands no longer remembers its owner. Our knees become prunes. One night I see my father weep and rock like a forgotten river. How he must know what it's like to fight against disappearance. The longer I stay in the home my lover and I built on this mountain, the more I tire of circadian leaps into the field of cacti. Every year, Lake Azuye rises and forces change on the trees and birds and people of the watershed. They no longer believe it will leave them. I spend nights running from hail in the company of vultures. I make peace with the ways my father and I look away from errors and ruin. My parents make rituals of warnings, and I follow in their footsteps anyway. My mother says I can build a new home from clouds, and I believe her. The next poem that I'll read is called Pray, P-R-E-Y. My lover once said a woman is best with a mouth as a closed door. If she should want to open it, let it be brief and of bright blooms. If she should dare to make herself bigger than a man with her voice full of restless bells, she must be ready to make war with hands bare. If she can't, she must nail her tongue to a tree's bark or he'll bury her in the earth's belly. I no longer wish to be the ground carrying him, no longer wish to follow his rules that drain me of fresh water. Today, I am guilty of becoming a falcon, every bit of him for my consumption. For years, I have felt alone and dry-bellied, but tonight, I am Ezeli Danto's child, armed with scarred vines and silver. I strike, and he falls like leaves under the weight of a half woman, half mountain. The next poem I'm going to read is I Don't Own Any Watches. He told the air not to come around here anymore. It doesn't matter that I wear the pleading so well, how my chest holds a sickness only my lover's watch could have implanted. Saturday morning and no ray in sight as he sits in a dorm room chair just big enough to keep him from falling. He calls me over, gives me 10 seconds or he'll teach me an old lesson. The skin surrounding my right eye is still dyed black from his fist the last time his voice fell from his lips that way. 10. Lord, where are your arms? 9. Will today be the day dead bees fall out of me? 8. The inner winding organs rust with hunger. 7. How many bald hands will it take to collapse into numbers? 6. His foot tap against the floor sounds like sunken birds. 5. Will I remember what it feels like to be a woman lodged in an occasional love? 4. I want to be soft beyond the orbit of these veins. 3. I'm ready to bury the gamble. 2. Who has the recipe for making a feast with scraps of time? 1. I sprint to his Arctic lap. Can he hear me conjure his wrists disappeared into wildfire? The next poem I'll read is called Nocturne. I'm getting used to undressing in this dying wilderness. Now that he's banned from my home, when sky darkens and thickens with breaths that once were, I think I hear him outside my front door. This is normal. Intense fears after the scorching, dormant memories fly out of the body's openings, no warning. Desires to void places that remind me, even if place is home. Tonight, a stray cat stands on my back deck and wails as if she's tired of aching for us both. My ivory slip hugs me like it knows it's my own kind of moon. I flip on the deck's light. Her amber eyes claw mine and she runs. Perhaps she doesn't want to see me standing there like a tree stripped of its leaves and water. This protection order guides me through split existence. A forest after partial clearing with blinds open, I let the slip become its own rainfall. Trust the air on my uncovered body. Some nights I wish to rush growth by plunging my feet in the soil, that I could make sense of wondering if he's eaten, if he mourns, yet my body can't forget being cut through its heartwood. Each day I show up everywhere, fighting to be a steady dwelling. And the last poem I'll read is called Prayer to Ezeli Danto, number 5. There's 6 of these in the book, and Danto is a Haitian Loa, which is a Loa in Haitian voodoo. So she is like the protector of women and children who are survivors of violence. In my dreams, I run across the ocean and become more woman with each wave. Something like you. I fly bruiseless and renewed by blue suns. Assemblies of mothers and daughters sing and laugh big until we all fly hand in hand. We sweat and become our own guava horizons. Every coconut tree is a city that welcomes us. No one tries to take the moon from our teeth. In this world, we don't have to lower our heads or bend. Everywhere we go, so does the water. Our hair shimmies at the clouds and makes songs with the wind. No rape, no black eyes, no pockets or soul sucked dry. No one to lead us away from this home. Everything we can dream is blooming and true. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nadia. Thank you all. It's been such beautiful work so far. Our final reader is Dorinda Wegner. And following Dorinda's reading, we will head right into the discussion. So thank you, Dorinda, for leading today's conversation. Dorinda was selected to be part of the 2024 Poets and Writers Get the Word Out poetry cohort. Her debut collection, Four Fields, was published by Trio House Press, and her essays and poems can be found on LitHub, Thrush, Mid-American Review, Indiana Review, Ethel, Hayden's Ferry Review, and Hunger Mountain. She is a peri-anesthesia certified registered nurse in Richmond, Virginia, who holds an MFA in poetry from New England College. Please welcome Dorinda.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here. I'm thrilled with the reading. I think that we rock. Good job. I'm going to be reading 4 poems from my debut collection, Four Fields. And I'm just going to jump right in. But I do want to say thank you again, especially being a nurse and coming from a clinical background, not a literary background. This is extra special for me. So really, thank you for letting me be here with y'all. Right on. Okay, I grew up in rural New Hampshire, half urban, or as urban as New Hampshire can be, and very rural. So this is the title poem of the book. It's called Four Fields. It's in 4 very small parts. I'll just pause. Four Fields. Every winter home to the farm taken by marsh thistle and wineberry. At the silo door, the family eidolon absolves me, my stock paper and indelible ink. A lifeline born from the tureen of their eyes, cold soup skinned. My sister is always a rabbit, my other a grizzly. I am a black swan nested. Survival is the dream of a cicada midair, a mass for the lost moon. And here is the first of 40 days, the crop rent by runnels and sidereal time, mother in early spring for her spade, riven by rocks is found clay-clad and weeping. What is blood among blood? What are locusts from the hands of God? In his Sunday suit, the oldest son remains plot-side. My brother, he is music not of the hand. He is our father's headstone and glass decanter, raised to the ergot sheaves, rose to the lip of the wind. And my second poem is Homestead. All the pathos in this poem are specific to homestead. The wind tugs the sweet gale, the pepperbush bobs in the thicket. Ice thaws in the brook outback, mud fossil footprints where the child ran, learnt the ways of serpent and bee. These were my fields. March bog where I nursed the lack of barn swallows nested in rafters away. Why does winter return me to old gray snow, white paint ill and peeling? They have remodeled the front barn and the silo clean gone. Sentimentality, my small enchanter's nightshade, you cliff seep my bones, leave me, these were my fields. The jolt April breeze disturbs, there should be no fear in this plot. I am no longer that wild button bush. And this poem here has an archaic verb, lease, L-E-S-E. It means to harvest, to till, to bring in. It can also be another word used for farmland and so forth. So, father sings for supper and severance. What survives? My sister's Ruth, a deed composition, his subject, verb, disagreement, father's dementia, paling his eyes, the trust in our family farm, marginalized. We have less Redora and ground blueberry than before. Bind and yoke the oxen rib thin, a second thought, everything is here. We have always had chickens and beef, gut and liver, beloved throat with aged esophagus. Eat, take up the time, tune, and sing to cattle, to cattle. I will wrestle long the withered heath. She will feed you everything, lease here. And then I'm going to end my time with you from the last poem in the book. It's called The Threshing Floor, and it is a mirror of the initial 4 fields in a lyric sort of way, mirrored in a very lyric sort of way. It's also in 4 parts. I will just pause in between the parts. The Threshing Floor. Goats were pouring forth their pure milk. Anemones were piercing the road's ribs. Lice were biting. The seers gathered in gawk. Almonds were blanching in bowls of cure. Teeth were breaking gum or falling out. Breath was fouling close to necks, to ears. Tongues were separating themselves. Houses were massing their shadows' lengths. Letters were uniting into Lenten plots. Who do you believe me to be is not the same as who do you say that I am. A gravel path raked by death dragging is the same as a bloom on the staff of life. Wheatgrass covers the field where once switchblade and broom sage grew, big and little blue stem, wild rye. The word preserve in late Latin means to keep in advance of. Coming rose, soft red winter, your brother, an ancient grain, our ancestors, roots not native to this soil. And the devil hath desired to sift us as wheat, tillers and main stem cut down, sickle, then scythe, then reaper binder, the wheat flail working, loose the berries, the wind a whistle through the straw as the sparrow shrieks. In this land, before fallow field or cultivated crop, before stolen and bloodshed, before we forced our own history upon it, before we faithfully answered, who do you believe me to be, before our weaknesses were revealed in the winnowing and we falsely witnessed, who do you say that I am? Let us relearn Latin, relearn as in conserve, to keep together. May the land take us to breast. May the land carry us under her arm as if we were omers of wheat to sieve and knead into a rough-hewn bowl. May the land leave us out to prove. May we rise together by grace. And that's my reading. So, and now I am so excited for this, ladies. I cannot wait. I have been excited to ask these questions because I would love to hear your responses. I want to learn everything. So I have 4 questions kind of broken down into themes, and I hope that we can get them all out there. And my first question is, I'm dying to know your approach. So how do you approach eco poetry, and how does your recent work intersect the call for social justice or environmental justice? What ways does your work challenge it or expand the traditional notions of eco poetry? And I can repeat any of that if needed. But so whoever wants to kick it off, I'm just dying to know your approach and where you feel you intersect and how you go about writing to the environment.
Well, I can jump right in if
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, well, with my book, In Inheritance of Drowning, I definitely wanted to center the book on looking at Hurricane Maria and what happened in the beginning, during, and after. And part of the book really examines how there was this lackluster response from FEMA here in Puerto Rico. So when I was looking at eco poetry, I was also thinking of, well, environmental justice, because we're seeing this right now with the Palisade fires, people saying, well, where's FEMA? You know, we need help. We need aid. Why are we waiting? Why are we filling out, you know, multiple forms? We need aid right now. So sometimes people don't realize that this is what happens when you have a natural disaster. The aid is very slow and it trickles down. And when you're thinking, well, you know, this is help that we all need, why isn't it immediately here? There are so many questions and there are very few answers why there isn't this, you know, immediate response. So I wanted to talk about all that because some people think like, well, this happened. Why should we be worried about it? One, also part of thinking about eco poetry is thinking of our relationship to the environment. When we think like, well, this can't happen to me, so many people are realizing, well, yes, it can. Because here in the Caribbean, of course, we have hurricane season, but look what happened this past hurricane season. It wasn't just the Caribbean that was affected. You had Florida, you had Georgia, you had the Carolinas. Before that, you had Texas. And now with the fires, many people are thinking, well, that's just California, but it has also spread. So when people think, well, this just can't happen to me, yes, it can. And yes, it is. And we have to think about our relationship with the environment. We can't really afford not to, because if we keep thinking, well, it's not going to happen, it's not my problem, it's not my issue, we're just going to keep seeing more of these natural disasters. It's going to be more devastation. It's going to be widespread. So I also wanted to mention that in my book as well. I have a poem and it says in the poem, our relationship with the environment, we should be thinking of it as kin. You know, if we thought of it more as like a relative that you love, okay, not a relative that you dislike, but a relative that you love, then we can think of it, yeah, right? We're working with the environment, not working against it, not ignoring it, but working with the environment, thinking, well, how can we help the environment? And then we can really be more in tune to all these signals, all these messages that the environment is trying to tell us. So I wanted to also mention that in my book. And then the last one, of course, when we think about these disasters, we really do have to think about those marginalized communities, which have been, you know, affected, you know, so much.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that in my book as well, because unfortunately for the marginalized, it's so hard for them to rebuild when the national disaster happens. You know, other people think like, oh, I can just rebuild or I can move. Other people, they don't have the means, the resources to do that. So I wanted to mention that in my book, In Inheritance of Drowning. It was really important to me as part of looking at eco poetry, looking at all those aspects.
Excellent. Thank you, Dorcia. And I love how you mentioned that it does affect everyone because, yes, California with the fires, but the air, the jet stream, the smoke is going to come over, and then the fallout with the rain affects the crops, and then the land gets intruded on, and then the crops are less. And it affects across the board. But Jessica or Nadia, do you want to add in anything as to your approach?
Yeah, I can say that my interest in eco poetry or nature poems and whatever
Yeah.
other terms is seeing the connections between how we treat the environment and how Black women and girls are treated, right? And seeing that those are
Yes.
intertwined. I can't remember the exact saying, but there's like a quote about like my liberation is bound up with yours, like just the interconnectedness of everything. And so, so there's that element, and you know, thinking about violence and survival, but also for me as a survivor, I began to kind of see myself much later in my book writing process as of nature, like I'm the sun, like I'm the trees, like I'm the birds, and that really did a lot for me in terms of healing, but also expanding my relationship to nature. So, yeah, I'm interested in those interconnections, and the spiritual is also relevant because when you think about what's happening, like there are elements of the natural world that people use as part of their spiritual practices, and or even like wood to create drums. And I think that I'm curious about what will happen to those practices the more environmental issues persist. Um, and so yeah, those are like my interests, and I also have a hybrid approach, which was mentioned in
Yeah.
my bio. And so the photographs in my book um, contain images of Black female subjects. It's self-portraiture. So it's me, but it's not me. It's me as a representative in nature, in the natural landscape. And so for me, there's an expansion there in terms of how we can expand how we tell these stories through poetry. And so, yeah, nature is witness. It's also participant
Yes.
in good ways,
Yes.
in good ways and in negative ways in my book. And so, um, yeah, that's what I would say to that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add, I love these responses. I think I've always been curious about nature or, just struck by the beauty of nature. And that led me into science, into studying nature
Yeah.
using Western science methodologies. And I went down that path for a long time, not really realizing sort of how it was taking away from my experiences in nature as a woman, as someone who genuinely cared about other creatures and places. And so I didn't really have a language to talk about nature until I turned to poetry. And I'm pro science. So there's a lot about science that I appreciate, but I think there's a balance that's needed. And I appreciate that Nadia mentioned the spiritual, because eco poetry brings in so many parts of nature that I think get torn apart in science or picked apart, and really kind of bring up the caring piece. Like, how do we care about people? How do we care about land? How do we nurture the earth? How do we nurture each other? And I think through my poems, I've been slowly unpacking that, starting from just appreciating the landscape where I'm at and wanting to write about that, to understanding how to take care of it, to some of the newer poems that I'm writing where there's just a lot of grief that's coming up, sort of this anticipatory grief of what you think is going to happen, as well as sort of those direct responses to natural disasters. And I love, Dorcia, what you're writing about in terms of just responding to sort of the on the ground realities of what we're dealing with, because it seems like these news stories are coming by like every day, like another disaster, another fire, another town, and these are horrible things, and lives are lost, and it damage is done in disproportional ways. And I think we need to really dig into that as poets. And I think poetry is a really good form for digging into that and kind of remembering. Dorinda, I feel like I heard a lot of sort of this memory and this deep connection to land, and how do
Yeah.
we hold on to that even as those landscapes are changing.
And the landscapes that you mentioned, and Nadia, I definitely want to mention the term witness that you used, and Jessica, the landscape, it's always changing. It's always changing. It's this slow creep of civilization. Like, we were never a suburb of a city, and now we are a suburb of the city. And now Fitch's Farm, where we used to go to get certain meats, no longer exists. And Lull Farm is now half its size. Some farms are completely gone. And then we have the pig farm, which used to be acres. It's now this one little stall. And growing up, I never knew how to how to help. I never knew what I could do. And Nadia, this is why I wanted to mention the witness that you said, because that would be my approach. That's how I try to help, is by witnessing, but not by taking on somebody else's, but just my own, and integrating it into my roots. You know, my family, they're mountain people. They're Catskill mountain people. You know, we're poor. And just trying to tap into the roots and use the landscape to represent stories of loss and stories of grace. So that would be my approach too. Yeah, I love you
I want
guys.
to add.
I'm sorry.
I want to add something to the. I want to add something to the witness thing. So,
Yeah,
I think often when people talk about Black poetry, Black eco-poetics, there's often this idea of the land of witness to, you know, things like enslavement.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
also think of it as like a witness to like gender-based violence, which I don't
Hmm.
think
Yes,
people
yeah,
um, think of talk about a lot. And what does it mean when you know, a Black woman is violated in front of, you know? So I think that
yes,
is another way that I think my project, which it's very much like I wouldn't say that they are traditional nature poems or anything. It's just very much like intertwined in the poems. It's just
yeah,
like how the
yeah,
speakers is like kind of seeing the world or like of the world. And so Camille Dungy's book Black Nature, or the book anthology she edited, really helped me to see that I am a part of the tradition, but just in a different way.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's, you know, a book that I kept close to me over the years, and still do.
When you speak to the weaving and the bringing together, and it's almost like making a strawberry braid out of strawberry vines. I remember doing that as a child, making braids with strawberry vines and using it to jump rope or to play with. When you speak of weaving, talk to me about how you weave in tension into the poems and grace into the poems. So like, how do you navigate the despair and the hope? And that's for everyone.
Um,
So
yeah, um, I think for me, I have poems that are more of a hopeful tone. And then I have poems that are of a more of a despair tone. But within
yeah,
those poems, you can see that the speaker does believe that there is something more than this, or maybe there is resistance, or maybe it's just a poem where the person is kind of um, is harmed, and that's what you kind of get through there. But you hopefully encounter some complexity in the feeling. So I think for me, given the subject of a lot of the poems in the book, I wanted to be careful because my ideal reader is whoever wants to read the book and would enjoy it. But I'm also thinking about people who are survivors reading the book. And so I wanted that to be an experience, some hope and some light in the book. And I think that's part of why I chose to include photographs, because the figure is, I mean, there's multiple photographs, but you know, you see someone alive, and it's not like there's nothing graphic or anything like that. And so I have more to add, but I'm going to stop there.
Well, for my poems, I would say that since my poems are talking a lot about contemporary society and the different realities that we're facing, most of my poems are really in a way, you know, very serious poems. So it's not considered light verse. They're not going to be what I can call like, you know, lighthearted love poems where we're just like, oh, it made me feel, you know, so wonderful inside. You know, most of my poems in the book, in Inheritance of Drowning, are trying to get readers to have this kind of call for a greater consciousness of what's happening today. And so there's like a sense of urgency, I think, with those poems. It's a sense of calling for social transformation. So with that kind of call, with that kind of urgency, I couldn't just sit back and do it in what I would call like a lighthearted manner. So there's like a gravity to the poems. If people do want lighthearted poems, I do have those, but most of those are not going to be in the book. Those other poems are going to be, you can find them online. You can just Google my name and find those. But the poems in this book, because it is called An Inheritance of Drowning, it's really to get readers to think about what kind of world do we want to inherit? Because if the way that we're going on this kind of trajectory, if we keep going the way that we're going, the world that we're going to inherit is going to be a world where we're going to have major environmental problems, you know, major social, political, and racial concerns, a lot of injustices in the world. So the book, you know, really tries to, you know, get the reader to understand that. So in that sense, you know, a lot of the poems are, you know, very, you know, serious. But I think they will leave the reader in a position where the reader can sit and think about those issues in a very, you know, positive way, thinking like, okay, this is what the book is asking me to do. This is how we can call for social transformation. These are the changes, perhaps, that we all need to make.
Yeah, oh, go
Oh,
ahead,
go ahead.
Jessica.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add that I think because gender-based violence experiences are so disempowering, that was another reason why it was important for me to include some light in the book, and just kind of, I mean, it's from like childhood to, you know, um, adulthood. And one of the poems in the book I had to do research for. My mom loves birds, and I was trying to figure out, you know, what is it about birds? Because I grew up in New York City, so all I really recall is pigeons. So I'm like, okay, we see pigeons everywhere. And so, but she's from, you know, she was born in Haiti, so there was, I think, greater species diversity there, or at least, you know, I just didn't pay attention. And so, living in Mississippi, I decided to go out and let me go watch some birds. And then it's something that I began to do regularly. And so there's like a reference in one of the poems about a mother who loves to watch birds fly. And I think that just the symbolism of birds when that appears in literature, particularly in Black literature, that was important for me to kind of like, you know, drop a nugget there, or even the Black women and girls in the book can turn into, they can shapeshift. And that was important for those elements to be in there, because it's kind of like pushing back against some of the violences that they are encountering in their experiences. And so, um, yeah, I think, you know, just kind of dispersing things throughout with the intention to um, provide like a sort of portrait or a series of portraits of a human experience. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to add. But I couldn't remember that earlier when I was answering. So I was like, I'm gonna have to come back so it could come back to me. But go ahead, Jessica.
No, it's great. I mean, I was just gonna say that, you know, I feel like it's important to help facilitate connections with nature and the beauty of nature. And I think uh, nature writing and eco poetry both do that. However, I feel like eco poetry, which I think is sort of a newer wave of environmental writing, inspires a political awareness that is very necessary right now. But it's hard to, you know, the times I've written angry environmental poems, they just haven't really been great poems, right? They're rants, and I don't know if they would land with a reader. So it's hard to not kind of hold your edge and then also engage a reader in a meaningful way. And I don't necessarily write poems thinking anyone's going to read them, but at the end of the day, you do want them to be crafted in a way that it's sort of a holistic experience for the reader. And, you know, as much as I would love to just write poems about bees, the beautiful bees and the beautiful, you know, all the beautiful creatures around us. Like they're just, I can't get over the guilt I feel and the grief that kind of really is sort of with me all the time. Um, and and I think that just needs to come out sort of naturally in the work. And it, not that it should, but I think with, you know, with me it does. I write memoir as well, and I saw one review where someone said it was a little bit melancholy, and I was like, yeah, it was a lot melancholy because that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I do, you know, I think that's one of the things that in the poets that I really like to read is that there's always these sort of morsels of beauty that you can latch onto, and then lessons, and also, you know, ways to engage with some of the harder aspects.
I find that when you mentioned the holistic aspect, I find that I write like the way I navigate the tension and the hope is holistic in itself, but it's also very circular. So I navigate the tension by using nature, and then the only way I find hope in this world is by returning to nature. Like when I need to recharge, I go to the Shenandoah Valley. Like I got to go home for like the first time in like 15 to 20 years, and I saw the mountains back home, and I was just like, yes. So it's interesting that the the tension pieces that I'm writing about come from the land, but yet then the only way for me to have hope in my writing comes from the land. So I was very curious when we speak about land, and Nadia, you have mentioned this, and I had this image pop into my head because I have ADHD. Sorry, guys, let's go on a trip. So while you were speaking, Nadia, with the earth and land being aligned with a feminine gender, when I'm learning some of the roots of my family. My father was an orphan, and I don't know much about my where I come from. So I found out that we're coming from Ireland, and that they settled down in Catskill, and that for the longest time my dad worked in the cement. So constantly just digging into the earth and gorging it and just destroying it. And then as he grew, he built bombs, so thus more destruction. Um, but the digging into the earth and being raised on like Pennacook indigenous land in the Amoskeet Valley, and speaking to like marginalized indigenous groups or marginalized BIPOC individuals, or just speaking to that in general. Um, can we engage? Like, how do your poems? I'm just going to read it because I'm sorry, my mind is just really excited, so I apologize. I'm just going to read it, guys. But like, how do your new poems, or how do your poems engage the intersectionality of ecological vulnerabilities and the BIPOC community? Because that's something that I want to know about. I want to grow.
Um, well, what I'll say is that part of why I turned to um, the environment is because I was trying to make sense of certain experiences that I had growing up. So one of them being growing up in a apartment in Harlem that would flood, and it wasn't because of another person's apartment. So long
Mhm.
story, but that was what I was. That's what we were experiencing, and I started to think about hurricanes and floods elsewhere, particularly in Haiti, and so that kind of made it into the watershed poem, and that's kind of how I like bring it into some other poems, like just like a little nugget, trying to draw a parallel. Um, and so I think in terms of thinking about a place like Haiti and the deforestation that happens there, and natural disasters, and just thinking about how people deal. I think I wouldn't say that my poems make strong commentaries on those issues. They kind of just sort of reach for it whenever they do. And so, yeah, I think that's what I would have to offer to that.
I can just mention, my book, An Inheritance of Drowning, it's essentially in many ways like a love letter to Puerto Rico because
Yeah.
it does center Hurricane Maria. So I wanted people to really understand the impact that it had upon Puerto Rico, not only the environment, but also, of course, the people that live here, the economy, the agriculture, and also those that were displaced and pushed out and had to go. And then the other part of the book also looks at, parts of the United States. I have a poem in the book, Mad Love for Philly, which talks about the city landscape and how, Black bodies move in the landscape, but then sometimes they're not able to move. So you have part, I think, when we're looking at, in the environment and poetry, my book, a lot of times it's a commentary on how the environment is used. In that particular poem, the landscape, it shifts in a way where it's the policing of Black bodies. So there's a part in the poem, for instance, where I mentioned, you had the famous incident where you had, the Black men in Starbucks, and they're told, you cannot sit here. You also have the move bombing. So in the book itself, I'm showing how the environment, it's used in different ways. And again, the point I'm trying to show is for excuse me, for BIPOC communities to realize that a lot of the injustices that happen with one community, it's the same yardstick. It's the same yardstick for all of us. So in that sense, for BIPOC people, when you think, well, that doesn't happen to other people, for BIPOC communities, the marginalization that happens, it happens for us and against us. And so I'm trying to show that as well in the book. So it's not just, the injustices happening in Puerto Rico, is the injustices happening also with BIPOC communities in the United States as well.
Thank you, Dorcia. Thank you, Nadia. Yeah. It's interesting when you speak of the yardstick, because yeah. Says there is Puerto Rico that they're actually still haven't fully recovered from Hurricane Maria.
No, we
No,
haven't.
no, you haven't.
I was just saying to
Yeah,
somebody,
you
one
haven't.
example of the marginalization is, Hurricane Maria happened in 2017.
Yeah,
My area, we just got our insurance money to fix the damage that was done. So, it's just incredible because if you wait, to fix, in our case, it was our roof. If you wait to fix it, then you're going to have more damage. But
yeah,
in my case, it was $10,000 we had to pay to get our roof fixed. Most people just don't have $10,000, to go around. So this is how they get you. It's like they keep you in a situation where you're like, okay, I have to get this fixed. I can't wait for the insurance, but this is money that you were rightly owed. So these kind of situations, it's just such gross injustice. And I mentioned
yeah,
this in the book, but this is what we're also seeing now with the Palisade fires as well. People saying, we need help, we need, basic resources. Why isn't our government helping us?
yeah. It's so true. I was reading, and I have some friends out in California, and they have GoFundMe's just to cover basic housing costs, just because the money is not there to cover where are you going to live now. And it's so disheartening to hear that, well, it's going to have fires there. It just harkens so much. It's like, well, if you didn't dress that way. And it harkens to all these weird, just sinister statements that shouldn't be made. Yeah. How do you think
Yeah,
that we
like
can,
blaming people. You mean like
yeah,
blaming people for like
yeah, just like, well,
wanting to
is
live
there,
in a certain area?
yeah, like,
Yes,
yeah,
one of the attitudes that I've gotten is like, why do you keep living in the Caribbean? There's a hurricane season every year. And I
yeah,
tell people, it's like, well, my job is here, my husband's job is here, my child is situated here. A lot of us just can't get up and leave. There are family members here that are now elderly that we are responsible for. So it's not just like we can get up and leave, then it becomes a situation of, well, what about everybody else? Like if we leave, then who's going to help these family members? Because that's essentially what happened, for us here in
yep,
Puerto Rico. It's like, okay, during the hurricane, you need help. Okay. Everybody worked together. And then that's what I'm seeing in the Palisade fires too. The
yeah,
communities, coming together, because you can't wait for the government to help. So the communities, the family members that are there, they then look out for each other, which shouldn't be the case, but that's what it was. A lot of grassroots efforts on the ground helping each other.
I have a poem in my book that references, well, that's seeking to reference how people blame survivors, for staying and things like that.
Yeah.
And this idea of staying in an area where there are hurricanes and stuff come up in the poem. And so when you were speaking, Dorinda, I thought about that. It's in the Danto series, the poem where there's six
Yeah.
repeating same title. And I really intentionally wrote those prayer poems partly because when I learned about her as a um, someone that we could call on as victims of um, different violences, particularly sexual violence included, that was really important. So that was part of why I thought it was. I think spirituality can be something that folks tap into in order to help them to transcend. And so that was my interest. And, I'm not a religious person. And so when I say spirituality, I'm often thinking of, crystals
Mhm.
and like,
Yeah.
African traditional religions and things like that. And so I think that's what I'm trying to suggest there, which is not to say that is what makes problems disappear, but in terms of helping you to get to the other side of it or to cope, or you know voodoo was important in terms of the
Mhm.
Haitian Revolution. Like, I
Yep.
think that's what I'm trying to point people towards when the speaker is has these prayer poems to her and is
Yeah.
seeing herself in Danto. But I just wanted to offer that as well.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. As a nurse, we have and this is when I say this, when I say the line that nurses say to each other, it's not meant flippantly, it's meant very seriously. But we have when I say faith, I mean spirituality, I mean everything. But the nurses will say to each other, faith is a wonderful thing to have while science tries to figure it out, because it does go hand in hand. The spirituality and the science, they go hand in hand, and the health of us goes hand in hand with the health of the earth, and the healing of us goes hand in hand with the healing of the earth. And I think um, I think the prayers that you mentioned, Nadia, and I think that the grassroots that you mentioned, Dorothea, and then Jessica, you mentioned just being grateful and present and thankful for what is in front of us. I think that's the only way that we're going to really bring about change, because it seems like it's such a juggernaut. It's so huge that I really only feel that I can influence at the base grassroots arena or area. Um, how do you think that we can give back to our audience and give back to each other? Like, um, how do you think we can deeply engage more with the current changes, with ecopoetics in our work? How can we integrate it into the community so maybe we can take what we have here with the four of us and move it out? What advice or insights can you offer to other poets or other people who aren't poets but have the same concerns and fears that we have? Am I making sense? I don't feel I'm a
Yeah.
very good moderator, guys.
No, you're doing
Thank you.
great.
Okay,
Yeah.
yay. All right, continue.
I'll just add, I offer a monthly writing group, and it's free. It's at our local bookstore, and I had called it Environmentalists Anonymous, but some people didn't quite understand my title, so I changed it to Ecological Writing Group. And you know that is for anyone, whether they identify as a writer or not. And I feel like it's a space where people can just start to cultivate, this awareness, this ability to see whether it's beauty in nature or see something changing in their backyard or neighborhood that they don't like, or regionally. And then also you know, and this kind of, you know, it's a bit spiritual. It's also deeply personal, but just sort of where does caring and compassion come from when you're talking about the natural world? And, you know, a lot of people don't have the time or the luxury to sit and contemplate these things. Like, and I think that's a really hard thing to address, because, you know, essentially everybody needs to be an eco-poet if we're going to turn the ship around, right? And, you know, so I think every new poem is sort of needed. And one of the things we do in the group is we just read the news, right? And not, don't let those stories fly by. Don't let, you know, another neighborhood lose their neighborhood and not be compelled to even think about it or do some sort of action. And I do think that awareness and that caring leads to action, maybe not immediately, but ideally over time.
Thank you. So that's awesome. Can I be a part of your group? Is the group virtual?
It's not, it's in person, but if you're in Bellingham, come on over.
I encourage people too to keep writing, keep sharing these stories. I think the world
Yeah.
needs definitely more poetry, but more literature. More stories need to be told. Don't be afraid also to keep reading. Sometimes people are so focused on writing, they forget, like, keep reading. That's how I discovered Craig Santos Perez's work. And I was just blown away at the similarities of how similar the situation of Guam is to Puerto Rico. I was like, where has this been all my life? And I would encourage people, if you have the time and the means and the wherewithal, the bandwidth to get socially involved, take social action. I mean, there are different ways that you can do that. You know, it could be sending an email, it could be writing a letter, it could be donating $1, it could be donating an hour of your time. There's so many different ways to get involved, if you can do that. I know some people cannot do that, but it can also be just helping your neighbor. You know, small things, planting a garden,
Yeah.
you know, planting a tree, that, you know, cleaning, you know, the bush, you know. I mean, there's so many things that people think like, well, this isn't going to make a difference. And I tell people, yes, you know, it really will, you know. If you see, you know, debris, or if you think like, you know, there's no recycle center here, there's no recycling program here, maybe that's something you could start at a school. Yeah, I mean, so like little things that you think like are not going to matter, not going to make a difference, they really, really can. All it takes is just sometimes a call or a push, the initiative. And if you feel you can't do that alone, ask a friend, you know, to join you.
I would add to get curious and so what I mean by that is to get curious about yourself, get curious about environmental issues, get curious about start developing a relationship with the natural world. Because I think that sometimes fear can keep people away. And so I think kind of inching into that and keeping yourself informed will hopefully inspire you to care about these issues or ask questions that you might engage with through your poetry, which can better help you to understand yourself as well as these issues and how they might be connected.
It's beautiful. Thanks, guys. I think that was a wonderful way to end. Yeah, just connect.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dorinda.
Yeah.
I think you did a fantastic job as moderator, by the way. But thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Jessica, Dorcia, and Nadia as well. That was such an important and thoughtful conversation. I really do hope that it inspires other writers, especially poets, to think a lot more about some of these ideas, especially the idea of witness. Is just so important in these times of crises. And of course, not just the climate crisis, but the multitude of other crises that we're currently experiencing. And then I might be biased because I am just such a big fan of eco poetry myself, but the readings today were just so fantastic. There was just so much power and beauty there. So thank you all again for sharing your work with us today, in addition to the conversation. Yes, thank you. And thank you also to Mackenzie, GetLit's assistant coordinator, for all of their hard work today and behind the scenes leading up to this event. To everyone watching at home, I hope that you'll join us for more festival events, both in person and here on Zoom. Please visit our website, getlitfestival.org, for our full schedule and more information about all of our authors, including today's 4 talented writers. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, guys.